This happened to me when I was 13. For some background, I had switched to another school that was further away from home, and now instead of just taking only one bus, I had to take a bus, a train, and then another bus to get there. With my now longer commute, I had to leave my house around 7 a.m. if I wanted to be there around 8:30 a.m. For the most part, I was never worried about my safety since public transport was busy in the morning. As I got off the train, I had to cross a big bridge in order to reach the area with the different bus routes. There were 3 major ones, but it didn't matter which one I got on, as they all passed the school before breaking off in separate directions. So one morning, as I was waiting for one of the buses to show up, some random construction worker, also waiting for a bus, started talking to me. He looked around mid-30s. I didn't think much of it, as I was easy to have a conversation with. I started seeing him more frequently at the bus area, and I began to find it a bit strange because he would always compliment me. He'd say I had a cool bag or a nice jacket at first, but he never said anything to raise any red flags. Things started to get weird pretty quick, and he would start complimenting my features, saying that I had pretty eyes or a cute smile. I was beginning to get a bit uncomfortable, but again I also brushed it off and chose to start avoiding him. I never thought too much of my own safety, as there were people around and I had a cell phone in case I had to call my parents or the police. I didn't see the guy for a few days, so I began to think that I was in the clear and forgot about him. Then things really began to escalate. I was sitting by myself with my earbuds in when suddenly someone tapped my shoulder and sat behind me. It was the guy, and now he's talking to me like we were friends. I was really uncomfortable. Tried to dismiss him and went to walk away to the other side of the bus area. But that's when he says something that really caught me off guard. He just casually turns to me like it's nothing and says, "What would you do if I tied you up and never let you go?" I was genuinely appalled. I got up from the bench and started walking away. He got up and started to follow behind me when thankfully 2 buses pulled in. He of course followed me onto the bus and I wasn't having it. So I got off and hopped onto the second one. If he followed me on again, I was going to tell the bus driver I needed help, but the guy didn't. I was so damn confused. I went to school and the first thing I did was tell my friends what happened. I really did not understand the severity of the situation at first, because I was a 13-year-old male and I didn't think these things happened to guys. As I was telling the story, I was kind of downplaying it because nothing bad actually happened in my eyes, and there were no real repercussions. Everyone gave me a dumbfounded stare as no one knew what to say. Then one of the teachers overheard me, which I'm not surprised, I was a loud kid, and in a look of shock, brought me to the principal's office. So I missed the entire first period of the day explaining what happened to the principal and a police officer. My parents at first were really confused on why I didn't mention anything about the weird guy before. I was driven to school the next few days until a police officer came over to talk to me and my parents. He said that they found the guy on the transit cameras, and were able to track him down and talk to him. There wasn't too much the officer could do aside from telling him to stay away from me since he technically didn't do anything illegal. The officer did tell me that they would be watching the train station around that time as well, and that if that guy ever were to approach or talk to me, to call 911. I saw him like 2 or 3 more times after, and he never spoke to me or even looked at me, which I'm very thankful for. I'm just glad nothing major came from it, but this did really open my eyes a lot about being more aware in public. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him. Especially after 2 friends told me that they knew him from a class where he was a genuinely funny guy. We go to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with 1 candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more odd. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets and asked if I had ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he seriously thought about killing someone, his ex's current boyfriend. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. But before we left, he said he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said he got it for hunting but couldn't even think of killing an animal. We left and I got back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that something was off about him and it's creeping me out. As a child, I traveled a lot with my mother to different tourist places in our country and abroad. We celebrated that New Year's Eve in Austria, and I was 12 years old at the time. That day we were at a historical museum, one of the most famous places in Vienna, especially for tourists like us. However, I remember that this rendezvous was very tiring for me. When we were at the very bottom of the museum, my mom said that she wanted to go to the bathroom and asked me if I wanted to go to the store afterwards before leaving. I replied that I didn't, and I told her I would wait for her at the bench in front of the wardrobe until she did her business. She was absent for a few minutes when a very tall man with a creepy smile from one ear to another and wild, wide-open eyes approached me when I was sitting there. He started talking to me, and I thought he asked me some questions, but he was speaking German, and I didn't understand what he was saying to me. I replied to him that I didn't know the language, which infuriated him. He touched my shoulder and changed his voice from affectionate to aggressive. His English was so-so, as was mine, but he tried to convince me that I do really speak German and that I tried to fool him. At this point, my mom came back and approached the man in surprise. He was clearly frightened, quickly waved at me and fastly walked out of the museum. My mother asked me what he wanted, but I didn't know what to say to her, for I didn't understand anything of his speech except the complaint that I didn't answer him in German. There was also an elderly couple there who overlooked the encounter. I approached them and asked them what the man was trying to tell me. The woman just replied something that it doesn't really matter, that the man was very strange and that I should be more careful. Who knows what would happen to me if my mom hadn't shown up on time. So for some context, I live in a small trailer court in Arizona, and directly next to us is a railway that goes across the whole state and leads to a Walmart if you head down for 20 minutes. I was a teenager in 8th grade at the time, with no car or transportation other than a bike. The railroad tracks go in a straight line, directly leading to Walmart. So if I were to bike to Walmart, it takes me about the same time as if I walked straight down the tracks. So more often than not, I would walk, as I was never really a big fan of riding bikes, as I have had back issues since a young age. On this date in particular, I decided to head to Walmart for some dumb kid stuff shortly before the sun was about to set. This detail will come into play later. Basically, I went to the store and got distracted, just looking around. Bought some food and drink and some trading cards, but left as the sun was going down. It's about a 20 to 25 minute walk home, and I decided to head down the tracks again. At about 10 minutes into walking, it was getting very dark, and in general, I was a fearful and anxious child due to my autism. I was scared of the dark until I was about 14 and a half, and I would often have nightmares or see things that weren't there in my closet or dark corners, etc. So as it became too dark to see, I was getting extremely nervous and hyper-vigilant. 5 minutes later, I could swear I was hearing footsteps crunching in the rocks lining these tracks that weren't mine. I stopped a few times to listen and confirm someone was walking towards me from a significant distance away. I could not see them at this point because of the darkness and lack of lighting across the railroad tracks. I had no phone or flashlight of any kind. At this point, I started freaking out internally. First, I didn't know what to do, but as the sound of the footsteps got closer, I decided to call out and let them know that I was coming towards them. I stopped as I did this and said something along the lines of, "Is someone there?" While I know this might seem silly as an adult, but I was used to my brain playing tricks on me in darkness, and I was convinced I was hearing things. No response. At this point, the footsteps were getting closer, still difficult to distinguish over my own, so I stopped. Footsteps continued for a brief moment, and then they stopped too. I called out again. I said, "Hello, is anyone there?" No response again. I was still prepubescent, and I had a child's voice. I feel like any reasonable adult would have responded and said, "Yes," or "Yeah, I'm just walking," or whatever, as I had a genuine, noticeable fear in my voice. After I received no response again, I told myself I was just imagining it, and continued on my journey. At this point being just under 15 minutes from my house, and I heard them again, footsteps coming closer as soon as I started to walk. At this point, fear took over, and I started yelling and making whooping sounds, thinking it might be some sort of animal. I yelled things such as, "I know you're there," and "I have a knife," which was total bullshit, but thought it might encourage this person to respond. Still nothing. A few times as I was speaking, I would hear the footsteps stop again. Finally, about 3 to 5 minutes later, stopping multiple times and hearing his footsteps stop. Sorry that I can't give a super specific time frame. I was in total fight or flight, scared out of my mind, so it gets a little hazy from here. But I start seeing this guy materialize out of the darkness. He had on blue jeans, a dark hoodie with the hood completely masking his face from a distance. I was instantly relieved for whatever reason. Relieved to know I wasn't crazy maybe, I don't know. And began verbal vomiting to this guy that I was just scared. And I didn't know that he was on the tracks for sure. He again did not respond, and this was before mainstream Bluetooth audio. and I didn't notice any headphone cables even when I passed him. Because he didn't respond, I was eyeing him warily as he approached and we locked eyes. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine. He was staring at me coldly and blankly, with a menacing look in his eyes, like he was thinking about what to do. He had his hands shoved in his pockets, and as I was passing him, he looked like he was going to pull something out of them in his right hand. I was a very scrawny kid, and even though I had back problems, I was fast as hell. I just hurt from running for too long. But when I was going down the tracks at full sprint, it was all a blur. I tripped and fell twice, as well as soaked myself in mud when I tried to get across a small ditch, separating the track from the trailer park, and got home. I never told my mom, and I never walked on those tracks at night again. After reading through this again, I thought that I would describe the tracks a bit for more context. They are on an elevated hill next to the trailers, and you can either walk a minute in the wrong direction to get on the main road I live on, or you can cut through this one small spot where some people have put a board down for that exact purpose, to get across the ditch and onto the tracks. The board was broken in half and partially submerged, so it was kind of like you had to jump and land on the board with one foot, and then kick off to the other side. The ditch is maybe 3 feet across, so it's not a huge jump, but it always has nasty standing water in it. Once you get on the tracks, there's a super long stretch with absolutely no way off, other than private property of a factory the railway delivers goods to, which you can get in trouble for trespassing on. Then there's a junction about 20 minutes down, and another 5 minutes from there, which is where Walmart is. Due to this, I couldn't just get off the tracks when I ran away. I had to get to the ditch before I would even be able to. I'm a female in my mid-20s, and I went to the local grocery store tonight around 5 p.m. It's winter and it's getting dark by 5 p.m. where I live. I was in an aisle taking my time deciding between the options when this late 20s, early 30s looking guy with light features and glasses and a scruffy beard comes right next to me and just stands there. I didn't think much of it or even look at him at first because I figured, whatever, he's just looking too. But then after a few seconds, I noticed he wasn't moving or doing anything, just standing there. So I looked at him and he was already staring at me, and for half a second I thought he might say something to me. So I stood there for a second just looking back at him. He didn't say anything, so I just turned and fast walked away from him. At this point I'm thinking, okay, that was weird, but whatever. Probably just an awkward guy who doesn't know how to talk to women. Then not even 30 seconds later, I'm in another aisle and I see him out of the corner of my eye coming down the aisle that I'm in, again staring right at me. So again, I walked away as fast as I could and I just went right to the self-checkout. While I was at self-checkout, I'm looking over my shoulders the whole time, making sure he isn't behind me anymore, and he's not. I start walking out of the store, relieved that once again, I was just being paranoid, and I wasn't ever in any real danger. As I'm walking out, I decided to look behind me one more time, and there he is, right fucking behind me. I then notice he has nothing in his hands, no groceries, and he's heading towards the door right on my heels. Without even thinking, I just stopped dead in my tracks. I look right at him again. He's already looking at me, and then he puts his head down looking at his phone and walks past me out the door. He bought nothing. I'm so scared at this point, my head is spinning. I didn't know what to do. I could see my car because I parked close to the exit, thank goodness. So I call my fiance and sprint as fast as I can to my car. I jump in, lock the doors, and start looking for this guy. Then I see him. He's aimlessly walking around the parking lot through the cars. He's pretty far away from me at this point, and I have my fiance on the phone, so I'm feeling somewhat safe again. I watched him walk around for another few seconds before I got out of there. I have no idea what this guy was doing or what his motive could have been. Maybe he was just a weird dude who doesn't know how to talk to girls. Or maybe he was a predator with dangerous intentions. Or maybe he thought I looked like easy prey for robbery. The thing I really can't wrap my head around is the fact that each time I noticed him, he was already staring at me. He was not discreet at all, and I would think a dangerous predator might be a little bit more inconspicuous. He also didn't buy anything from the grocery store, which I also can't understand. I was in the store about 5 minutes before I noticed him, so I'm sure he didn't follow me in the store. I'm not sure if I'm being paranoid. There's a lot that didn't feel right, so I'm having a really hard time trying to rationalize this experience. Definitely a creepy encounter. This happened several years ago, when I was working in a downtown jail in a large city as a counselor. I worked a weird shift and got off at about 2 a.m., so it was obviously dark when I got off, and most of the people on the roads were people who were just closing down the bars downtown. At this job, I interacted with inmates who were various levels of stable and sober, and sometimes they were released at the same time as I was leaving work. The garage where I parked was a couple of blocks away from the jail, so I was cautious walking to my car but didn't usually have issues. Anyway, this particular night, I got to my car safely and started home, about a 25-minute drive. Very quickly after I pulled out of the garage, I noticed a car right behind me with the tie beams on. It followed me through a downtown, onto the highway, and then exited at my exit. And I wasn't too freaked out yet because I lived off a major road, but then it took every turn that I did and pulled into my apartment complex right behind me. Well, at this point I'm getting concerned, but it's a big complex, so I just head toward my building. The car is right behind me. I usually back into my reserve spot, but this car is so close that I literally can't. I pull in forward. The car drives up behind me and stops, blocking me in. At this point I'm scared. I consider calling someone, but all my friends are probably asleep because it's 3 a.m. Calling 911 feels like an overreaction, so finally I dial 911 on my phone, but don't press the call button and step out of my car. A man gets out of the car. He's tall, white, wearing a vest and a fedora. He stares at me, a female that's 26 years old and blonde at only 5'3". After about 10 seconds of that, he says, "Oh," gets back in his car and drives off. Still one of the weirdest encounters of my life.